Welcome to Excel Campus. My name is John, and the following video is a clip from one of my live Q&A meetings that I do after my webinars. And this particular clip is on how the subtotal metrics macro works and also explains how to implement these types of formulas in your macros and in your workbooks. So Michelle had a question about, it was kind of a two-part question. She wanted to find the last row in a sheet and then create a subtotal formula like 2 rows below that. So down below the table she wanted to then create a subtotal formula. So I kind of quickly wrote this macro to show how you do that and how you use that variable. So what this is doing here, let me pull up a sheet that this will work on. There we go. Yeah, this is gonna be good. So let me go over this data sheet. So for example, she wants to first find the last used row. So if we have this sheet of data here, we might want to find the last used row. Let me clear the filters. Right, and we want VBA to do this. And then, oh boy, scrolling. And then find the last used row and then put a formula down here, somewhere down here. So like I said, there's a few different ways to go about this in VBA. In this case here, we can use the range.end method. We're using this end method right here. And all this is doing is on this particular sheet, it's going to go down to the last row within the sheet. Rows.count is going to return the last row in the sheet and then go up from there until it finds a cell that has a value in it. It's called a used cell. So in Excel, that's the exact same as holding down the control key, hitting down arrow, going down to the very last row here, and then hold down the control and hit the up arrow and going to this first used cell. That's exactly what that does. That's going to return that row number. So if we run this now and step into it, see that, oh, I'm on the wrong, yeah, I did that. Let's end that there. That was in, that was in this workbook here. I think I put that in the wrong spot. Yeah, there we go. Yeah, oh, I have it here as well. Okay. Sorry. So if we run that now, that'll return that row. Oops, there we go. Row 372 right there. And then we're going to use this variable to say go down 2 rows from that. So L formula row is going to be row 374. And then we're going to just reference column Y and that row number and then put a formula in, and that formula is going to be this subtotal function right here. And it's going to say, you know, Y4 to Y, whatever the last row is, 372, and put our formula in there. So I hit F8, jump back here, and here's our subtotal formula right there that was put in there by the VB editor. So that's how that works. Yeah, and so but that's a great one to know, right? It's to kind of figure out how you find that last row, something we always use all the time. And then Michelle, you also made me think of another kind of idea this morning, and I wrote a macro for that one as well, which was this subtotal metrics, which basically would create kind of this little summary of all the different subtotal functions within the subtotal, so all the subtotal metrics in the subtotal function, which are all these average, count, max, min, and sum, all these different functions. So I wrote this macro that does this, and basically what it does is, I'll show you here, I'll just run it. Let's see, I'll just run that, sorry. So it's first going to ask us to select a range. Let me go back here. So we want to select a range. Let's say we'll take this revenue column right here. I'll just select that there. So he's using an input box. Hit OK. And that ran. And now if we go down to the bottom here, that's going to add this kind of little box here with all the different metrics for the subtotal function all on that. And it adds formulas for each of those right there. So we get our average, count, you know, max, min, kind of a little just quick little metrics box here, summary with all these different metrics from that particular column or that range we just selected. So that one's there, you know, sum right there. So I just thought that was kind of interesting because we have all those different options here, those different functions within subtotal, and this will just create them all so we can see which one we want. Yeah, so that may be something, you know, that we could build out onto later, or just add that to your personal macro workbook if that's something you want to run sometimes, just select a range and get everything to quickly see a summary of all that stuff. That's one there. So again, the possibilities are endless, or just really limited to our imaginations with VBA, which is awesome. So cool. Okay, so let me make sure if there's any other questions, feel free to ask them. I'm happy to hang out, answer questions. I think there's a few more on the sheet or on the list as well. Let's see, Michelle has a question here. Okay, yeah. So great question. Oh yes, and Michelle is a Falcons fan. Okay, so I hope you voted twice, Michelle, because our poll changed. Now we have 25% Patriots, 25% Falcons. So it's going to be a tie. Still 38% don't care. Okay, great question. So on the putting the total to the left, to do that, you can use the offset property for that. So let's say, for example, we had, that was in, let's just make it simple, range Y 374, it was there. Was where our formula was, and then if we can use the offset property, so dot offset, and when you open the property there, we get a row offset and a column offset. And both of these parameters, these are called parameters, or we call them arguments in Excel, but they're called parameters or arguments. You can see that they're in square brackets there, and that means they're optional. Same thing with Excel functions. If you see them in square brackets, that's an optional parameter, so you don't have to specify it. But we will just for this case. So we're not going to offset any rows. So I'll just say 0 rows, comma, and then we can go back to the left, -1 columns, and do that. And then you can say dot value equals total, something like that. So that would go 1 to the left of column Y. That's one way to go about it. Since those parameters are optional and you don't have to specify them, you could leave this as just comma -1. Or if you only wanted to offset 1 row and no columns, you could put 1 and not have the column there. So sometimes you'll see that, and it's just good to know that means those are optional. And you can see them again if you go to the quick info, right click quick info. You'll see those there again. So that's just good to know. If you come across this code somewhere and you say, well, it only has 1, where's the column offset? It's not necessarily required. So that's 1 row. You can see it's bolded there. That lets you know that's the parameter you're in. If I hit a comma now a column offset's bolded, and that's the parameter I got to input now, which would be -1. Change that back to 0, and hopefully that helps. Go Falcons. Okay. Okay. Yeah, so yeah, right, Y374 is going to change. So you could do this here, you could use this instead of Y374. You could do that right there and still offset it. So this is going to return the last row +2. And then, so it would be Y, 374, and then offset back 1. Now you could just put this as W, or X, late in the day for me. You could put that as X, or you could, if those are both going to change, you could use the cells property as well to reference the column number. So, cells, there we go. So we have a row index. In this case, that'd be L formula. We'll autocomplete that, control space, and then our column, and you could maybe you're finding the last column, so that might might return a variable for L column, something like that. And that would be your last column and your last row, and then you can offset from that if you want. In that case, you might not have to use offset. Instead, you could just subtract 1 from whatever your column is, something like that. So a lot of different ways to go about it. Hopefully that I didn't go too fast there. But there's definitely a few ways to go about changing those references to cells using that offset property.